The sky over Series 7 had always been a lie, a masterpiece of engineering I'd helped paint myself. For 20 years, I'd calibrated the atmospheric generators, tweaking the nitrogen-oxygen balance and coaxing the magnetic field simulators to dance just right, creating a perfect, placid blue ceiling above our little world of hope. We were terraformers, pioneers, the first generation of humanity to build a home from scratch, so far from Earth that our mother world was just a forgotten myth in the star charts. We were proud members of the Galactic Covenant, the newcomers who had proven our worth through sweat and science. They gave us the barren rock, and we gave them a paradise, a testament to human ingenuity. That blue sky was our promise to the galaxy, and their promise back to us. On the day the promise broke, the sky bled. It started not with a bang, but with a shudder, a low-frequency hum that vibrated through the composite rock of my workshop and up into my teeth. My daughter, Lena, who was chasing a maintenance drone with a little net, stopped and looked up, her 7-year-old face a mask of confusion. Outside, the sky flickered, the perfect blue faltering for a microsecond, revealing the hard, black truth of the void beyond. Then came the alarms, a discordant symphony of failure across the colony. The Covenant channels, usually filled with trade chatter and diplomatic pleasantries, erupted into a cacophony of panicked voices before being sliced into an unnerving silence. I grabbed Lena, pulling her close as my husband. Reese burst through the door, his miner's jumpsuit covered in dust. "Ilara, get to the shelters." "Now," he said, his voice tight with a fear I'd never heard before. That's when the first one landed. It wasn't a ship. Not in any sense we understood. It was more like a shard of obsidian, impossibly black, that didn't descend so much as it simply arrived, punching a hole through our artificial sky and embedding itself in the soft, green plains a kilometer away. There was no fire, no explosion, just a wave of negation. The grass is the soil, the very air around it turned to uniform, lifeless gray, crumbling to dust as the wave expanded. We called them the Voro. We didn't know it then. Of course, to us, they were just the end. Reese shoved me and Lena toward the emergency hatch that led to the sub-level tunnels. The Covenant fleet is 5 minutes out. The distress call went through. They'll hold them off. Just get underground and stay there. I have to get my crew. He kissed me. A quick, desperate press of his lips, and then cupped Lena's face in his calloused hands. "Be brave, my little starling." He was gone before I could argue, before I could tell him that nothing was worth more than this. Right here, the tunnels were chaos. People screamed, children cried, the emergency lights strobed erratically, painting our terror in flashes of red. I held Lena's hand, my knuckles white, whispering reassurances I didn't believe myself. We were engineers, doctors, farmers. We weren't soldiers. We had built this world to live, not to die. Down in the Central Command Shelter, a cavern of steel and reinforced concrete, hundreds of us huddled around the main comm screen, watching the orbital display. The Voro ships were multiplying, dozens of those black shards arranging themselves in a silent, geometric pattern above us. And then, a flicker of hope. A fleet of Covenant warships warped into existence at the edge of the system. We cheered, a raw, ragged sound of pure relief. They were beautiful, sleek vessels of silver and gold, the flagships of the races who had welcomed us, who had called us brothers. They were here. The cavalry had arrived. The Covenant admiral, A six-limbed being of the Xylo's hegemony, whose name I can't remember and wouldn't speak if I could, appeared on screen. His voice was calm, sonorous, dripping with a manufactured gravitas that had always set my teeth on edge. To the Colonial Administration of Series 7, he began. We acknowledge your distress. The Covenant is aware of the Voro presence. The Voro ships didn't move. They simply waited. The Covenant fleet held its position. Minutes stretched into an eternity. We watched, our hope curdling into confusion, then into a cold, creeping dread. On the screen, the Admiral's face remained a placid mask. The integrity of the Covenant supersedes the viability of any single-member world. Your sacrifice has been deemed a necessary component of a broader strategic appeasement. It is a sacrifice we will honor. The transmission cut out. A collective gasp went through the shelter, a sound of 1,000 hearts breaking at once. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't say he was sorry. He said our sacrifice was necessary. Then, as we watched in stunned, betrayed silence, the beautiful silver and gold ships of the Galactic Covenant turned. They didn't fire a single shot. They didn't launch a single fighter. They simply turned, and with a silent flash of displaced light, they were gone. They left us. They left us to die. The screaming started again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the sound of fear. It was the sound of absolute, soul-crushing despair. The Voro began their work in earnest. From the orbital display, we saw their gray wave of purification sweep across our world, our farms, our homes, our workshops. Everything we had built vanished into sterile dust. I didn't see Reese again. His mining sector was one of the first to be cleansed. The comm signal from his team simply ceased to exist. In one moment he was there, a voice, a life, a husband and father, and in the next, he was just a data point that had blinked out of existence. Something inside me snapped. The grief was a physical thing, a shard of ice in my chest. But beneath it, something else was kindling. A cold, hard rage. They had sacrificed us. A strategic appeasement. Our lives. Our world. Our daughter's future. Traded away in some backroom deal to save their own worthless hides. Lena was sobbing into my side, her small body trembling. I held her tight, stroking her hair, and looked at the faces around me. The despair was still there, but in the eyes of some, I saw the same cold fire that was burning in my gut. We weren't going to just lie down and be honored sacrifices. My name is Ilyra. I was a terraforming engineer. I gave a barren world a sky. And I watched as the galaxy we trusted used that sky to frame our execution. But we weren't dead yet. The Voro were methodical, not swift. They weren't bombing us. They were unmaking us. And the process took time. This gave us a sliver of a chance. I wasn't a soldier, but I knew the bones of this world better than anyone. I knew the maintenance tunnels, the geothermal vents, the forgotten survey shafts that didn't appear on any official schematic. While others prayed or wept, I grabbed a datapad and began to draw a new map, not of a colony, but of a tomb we could fight from. I found others, an old, grizzled geologist named Corbin who knew the planet's crust like the back of his hand, a young medtech named Anya who had watched her clinic and everyone in it turn to gray dust, her eyes now holding a terrifying emptiness, a pair of twin mechanics, Jax and Kira, who could strip a cargo hauler down to its wires and rebuild it into something else entirely. We were a handful of ghosts in the machine of our dying world. We scavenged. The Voro's purification wave was devastating, but it was a surface-level phenomenon, deep underground, in the shielded sections of the geothermal plants and the lowest levels of the mines. Power and equipment remained. We used Reese's seismic drills not to find ore, but to carve new tunnels, connecting our hidden sanctuaries. We didn't have weapons, so we made them. The twins, Jax and Kira, became our twisted artisans of war. They jury-rigged mining lasers, turning them into clumsy but brutally effective cutting beams. They repurposed kinetic ore launchers into projectile cannons that fired sharpened lengths of rebar with enough force to punch through Voru ground drones. My contribution was more subtle. I was a terraformer. I controlled atmospheres, pressures, environments. The Voro drones that patrolled the surface were hardy, but they had limits. I learned to tap into the atmospheric processors remotely, creating sudden, localized pressure spikes in the tunnels ahead of their patrols, rupturing their internal systems. I would flood entire sectors with superheated steam from the geothermal vents, boiling them in their shells. We fought like rats in a wall, unseen, unheard, lashing out from the dark. We couldn't save our home, but we could make them pay for every inch of it. Our first real victory was small, but it felt monumental. A Voro drone, a six-legged insectoid machine that patrolled the ruins, had cornered a family of survivors in an old pumping station. We saw them on a grainy security feed, huddled together, the gray wave slowly closing in. Corbin used a seismic charge to collapse the tunnel behind the drone, trapping it. Jax and Kira hit it from both sides with the rebar cannons, staggering it, while I rerouted a coolant line and flash froze its legs to the floor with liquid nitrogen. It was a clumsy, desperate affair, but it worked. The drone fell, and we led the terrified family back into the deep tunnels. They looked at us like we were specters, not people. Maybe we were. We had lost our humanity when the Covenant fleet warped away. Now we were just instruments of hate, fueled by the memory of betrayal. We learned about our enemy in pieces, from the wreckage of their drones and the fragmented data we could pull from their systems. The Voro weren't just killing us. They were harvesting. Their purification wave broke down matter to its base components and reassembled it into more of their black obsidian technology. They were a virus, consuming and converting everything they touched. We weren't just being exterminated, we were being eaten. The Covenant hadn't just sacrificed us to a conqueror. They had fed us to a plague. This knowledge changed the nature of our fight. It was no longer about survival. Survival was a fantasy. This was about spite. It was about making our consumption as costly and painful as possible. Every drone we destroyed was a piece of our world they couldn't have. Every Voro we made bleed was a small act of defiance against the cowards who had sold us. I spent most of my time in what we called the Whisper Room, a comm station I'd cobbled together from scavenged parts, deep in a shielded geothermal pocket. I sent out our own distress call, not to the Covenant, but on every open, deep space frequency I could reach. It wasn't a call for help. It was a warning. My message was simple. I didn't give our names or our location. I just told our story. This is Series 7. We are dead. The Galactic Covenant watched us die. They traded our lives for their peace. The Voro are coming for you next. They will not stop. And the Covenant will not save you. There is no help coming. You are on your own. I broadcasted it on a loop, letting it radiate out into the void. A final testament from a ghost world. I didn't know if anyone was listening. I didn't care. I just wanted the truth to be out there. A poison in the well of their comfortable, diplomatic lies. One night, huddled in the whisper room, with Lena asleep on a cot behind me, her small form a constant, aching reminder of everything we'd lost. A signal came back. It wasn't a reply to my broadcast. It was an old, automated human emergency beacon. So faint it was barely distinguishable from the background radiation of space. It was coming from a wrecked ship in a nearby asteroid field, a human ship. An old colony vessel, the Odyssey, reported lost with all hands a decade ago, long before the Voro appeared. Its beacon was a simple, repeating code, a mayday, but embedded in the code, encrypted with an old Earth military cipher that took me 3 days to crack, was another message. Covenant compromise confirmed. Protocol winter contingency enacted. We are not lost. We are waiting. We are alone. My blood ran cold. This wasn't the first time. The betrayal of Series 7 wasn't an anomaly. It was a pattern. The Covenant had been feeding its human problem to the void for years. But this message was different. It wasn't a cry of despair from the dying. It was a promise from the patient. We were not the only ones who had been abandoned. We were not the only ones who remembered. And out there, in the darkness, someone was waiting. I looked at the coordinates flickering on my screen, a destination in a sea of black. Then I looked at the handful of survivors I had gathered around me, the broken, the grieving, the vengeful. We were ghosts, haunting the corpse of our world. Maybe it was time we learned to fly. The hope that bloomed in my chest was a venomous flower. For months, our existence had been distilled to a simple, brutal calculus of survival and revenge. We fought to make the Voro pay, and we survived to do it again the next day. This message from the Odyssey changed the equation entirely. It offered a future, a concept so alien and terrifying that it almost felt more dangerous than the Voro drones patrolling the gray dust above. A future meant risking the little we had, our hidden holes, our makeshift weapons, our bitter camaraderie on a single, impossible gamble. I gathered the others in the geothermal chamber we used as a command center, the air thick with the smell of hot rock and ozone. There were only 14 of us left, all that remained of a colony of 50,000. I laid the datapad on the makeshift table, the decoded message from the Odyssey glowing in the dim light. Corbin, the old geologist, read it twice, his one good eye narrowing as he stroked his grizzled beard. "A ghost," he grunted, his voice like rocks grinding together. "A 10-year-old ghost. Alara. This could be anything. An automated echo. A Voro trap. A madman's last words." He was the voice of caution, the anchor that kept our rage from boiling over into suicidal recklessness. And what are we? Corbin, I countered, my voice quiet but sharp enough to cut through the hum of the machinery. We're ghosts, too. The only difference is our tomb is still shrinking. Look at the energy readings. The geothermal vents are weakening. The Voro's purification process is going deeper. We have weeks, maybe a month, before they unmake this rock down to the core. We die here, waiting, or we die out there, trying. Anya, the young medic whose hands were now more skilled at setting explosive charges than setting bones, stared at the coordinates on the screen. "A ship?" she whispered, the word sounding foreign. "We don't have a ship?" "Jax, One of the mechanic twins wiped grease from his hands onto an already blackened rag. "Oh, we have a ship," he said, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time in memory. "We just haven't woken her up yet." He and his sister, Kira, led us through a labyrinth of forgotten mining tunnels to Sector Gamma, a place that had been sealed off after a seismic event 5 years ago. Beyond a collapsed passage they had recently cleared lay a cavernous hangar bay, a relic from the colony's construction phase, and, sitting in the center of it, shrouded in a decade's worth of dust, was the Goliath. It was an ugly, brutal-looking machine, a T-800 series deep space ore hauler. It wasn't designed for speed or grace. It was designed to haul 250,000 tons of rock through asteroid fields without flinching. It was a flying brick, a battering ram with an engine. Its landing gear was shattered. Its port side was staved in from the rock slide that had entombed it, and its primary reactor was colder than a Covenant promise. But it was ours. "She's got a military-grade frame," Kira explained, her flashlight beam dancing over the scarred hull. "Colonial authority insisted on it for hauling in the outer belts. Her armor's a meter thick. Her navigation systems are shot. The reactor's offline. And the life support is probably feeding a very happy family of mutated fungi. But the core is intact. The engines are shielded. We can make her fly." So began our final frantic project on Series 7. It was a resurrection fueled by desperation. While Corbin and his small team monitored Voro movements and mapped a path to the surface, the rest of us became a singular organism attached to the Goliath. Jax and Kira were the heart, working miracles with scavenged parts and sheer, stubborn genius. They cannibalized power conduits from the geothermal plant, patched the hull with plating ripped from derelict mining equipment, and hot-wired the ship's secondary systems with little more than copper wire and a prayer. My job was to give the ship a brain. The Goliath's navigation computer was a fried relic. I spent 60 hours straight interfacing my own datapad into its core programming, writing crude but functional flight control subroutines and uploading the coordinates to the Odyssey. Lena stayed by my side, handing me tools, her small, silent presence a constant source of fuel for my exhausted mind. Anya and her team, meanwhile, stripped the infirmary and the hydroponics bays, creating a stockpile of medical supplies and nutrient paste, enough for a journey of unknown length. We worked in near silence, a well-oiled machine of ghosts, each movement precise, each action driven by the ticking clock of our world's final decay. The day we were ready, a new kind of alarm blared through our tunnels, one of Corbin's seismic sensors. "They've found the geothermal pocket," he announced over the comms, his voice devoid of panic, resigned. "They're deploying a purification spire. It will drill down to the core and destabilize the entire region. The hangar will collapse in 3 hours." There was no more time for caution. It was now or never. Our journey to the hangar was a pilgrimage through hell. We abandoned the deep tunnels, our sanctuaries, and moved through the upper maintenance corridors, closer to the surface. Here, the Voro's influence was palpable. The metal walls were cold and slick with a strange, gray residue. The air was thin and sterile, devoid of the familiar smells of dust and human life. We had to cross the gray plains, a vast open processing area on the surface that led directly to the hangar's main launch bay doors. It was a kill zone, patrolled by Voro drones and overseen by one of their silent, Obsidian towers that pulsed with a sickening non-light. There was no way to sneak across. We had to run. "I'll give you a distraction," Corbin said, loading a satchel with the last of our seismic charges. He looked at me, and in his one good eye, I saw not fear, but a profound and weary peace. "The rock cries out when it breaks. Elara, I'll make this whole sector scream for you." Before I could protest, he was gone, disappearing down a side tunnel that led toward the base of the purification spire. We waited. 10 minutes later, the world shook. A deep, grinding roar echoed from the west as Corbin's charges detonated, triggering a chain reaction in the unstable rock around the Voro spire. The obsidian tower tilted, its silent hum turning into a discordant shriek. It was the distraction we needed. "Go!" I screamed, pushing Lena ahead of me. We burst onto the surface, and for the first time in months, we saw the sky. It wasn't the beautiful blue lie I had created. It was a shattered dome of flickering light, revealing the hard, star-dusted black of the void. And below it, our world was a nightmare of gray dunes under the shadow of the Voro fleet. We ran. The air was like razors in our lungs. Voro drones, diverted from the crippled spire, swarmed toward us, their metallic limbs kicking up clouds of sterile dust. Jax and Kira had modified 2 cargo loaders into mobile turrets, laying down a barrage of rebar spikes. The air filled with the shriek of tearing metal and the high-pitched whine of the Voro's energy weapons. I ran with Lena on my back, her small arms wrapped tightly around my neck, her face buried in my shoulder. I didn't fire a weapon. My only purpose was to get her to the ship. A plasma bolt hit the ground beside me, and the shockwave threw us to the ground. Anya was there in a second, hauling me to my feet, her face a mask of grim determination. "They're not getting her," she snarled, firing her pulse rifle at an advancing drone. We were almost there. The massive hangar doors, which Kira had managed to power up, were sliding open with a groan of protesting metal. But the drones were too many, too fast. They were flanking us, cutting off our path. Then the ground erupted in front of them. A deep fissure, hundreds of meters long, split the gray plains, swallowing a dozen Vora drones whole. I looked back toward the spire and saw a single, final seismic detonation flash at its base. Corbin. He had used his last charge, his last breath, to give us a path. We didn't waste it. We scrambled through the dust and chaos, over the newly formed chasm, and into the relative safety of the hangar. The doors boomed shut behind us, sealing us in with our resurrected ship. We had lost 4 more people in the run, including Corbin. There were 10 of us left, 10 ghosts in a metal shell. There was no time to mourn. "Strap in," Kira yelled from the cockpit, her voice tinny over the ship's awakening intercom. "This takeoff is going to be rough." I secured Lena in a webbing chair in the cramped engine room, kissing her forehead. "Close your eyes." "Starling," I whispered. "When you open them, we'll see real stars." The Goliath's engines roared to life, a deep, angry sound of defiance. The entire hangar shook as Kira bypassed the normal launch sequence and fired the main vertical thrusters at full power. With a scream of tortured metal, the ship ripped itself from its cradle, blasting through the hangar roof and into the dying sky of Series 7. The Voro were waiting. Their black ships moved to intercept, but the Goliath was a beast of pure momentum. Kira didn't try to dodge. She aimed for the thinnest part of their blockade and pushed the engines past every safety limit. Alarms blared, the hull groaned, and plasma fire scored black wounds across our armor. But we broke through. We punched through the last remnants of my artificial sky and into the pure, honest dark of space. Behind us, Series 7 was a marred gray sphere, a monument to our loss. Ahead of us lay the asteroid field where the Odyssey waited. Kira proved to be a genius at the helm. She flew the lumbering hauler like a fighter, using the asteroids as cover, spinning the ship on its axis to present its thickest armor to the few Voro pursuit craft that had followed us. Finally, after a tense hour of silence, we saw it. The Odyssey was larger than I had imagined, a city block of cold, dark metal. It was a ghost ship in a graveyard of rock, its hull pockmarked with micrometeoroid impacts and the scars of old, forgotten battles. It was silent, dark, and utterly intimidating. Using maneuvering thrusters, Kira brought the Goliath alongside one of its main docking ports. Jax overrode the external seals, and with a heavy clang that echoed through our hull, we latched on. For a long moment, nobody moved. We had made it. We had crossed the void from one tomb to another. "I'm going first," I said, grabbing a plasma cutter and a rifle. Jax and Anya fell in line behind me. We cycled the airlock. The hiss of equalizing pressure, the loudest sound in the universe. I cut through the inner door of the Odyssey and stepped through. The inside of the ship was dark, cold, and silent. Emergency lights cast long, eerie shadows down a vast corridor. There was no sign of a struggle, no bodies, no Voro corruption, just dust and silence and the profound, heavy feeling of a place that had been holding its breath for a very, very long time. "Hello." Anya's voice was a small, trembling thing in the immense quiet. The only answer was the echo. Then, a soft, blue light flickered to life at the far end of the corridor, followed by another, and another, illuminating a path deeper into the ship. A low, synthetic hum filled the air, and a voice, calm and clear and devoid of any human emotion, spoke from hidden speakers all around us. "Welcome, survivors of Series 7. It said, "The winter contingency is now concluded. My designation is Ares. Please secure your vessel. We have much work to do." The voice of Ares was the sound of a perfectly closing lock, precise, final, and without warmth. It guided us through the silent corridors of the Odyssey, our heavy mag boots echoing in the cavernous spaces where a crew of thousands should have been. The ship was a paradox, a pristine tomb. There was no dust, no decay. Maintenance drones, like silent spiders, glided along the walls, their optical sensors glowing a soft blue as they monitored systems that had been running on a low-power ghost cycle for 10 years. We followed the trail of lights to the ship's bridge, and the sight that greeted us stole the breath from my lungs. It was not a cockpit. It was a cathedral of information, a vast, hemispherical chamber with a floor of polished obsidian. It was dominated by a holographic display that currently showed a serene, three-dimensional map of the galaxy. The 10 of us, the dirty, ragged survivors of a murdered world, stood on the threshold, looking like barbarians at the gates of a forgotten temple. Lena clutched my hand, her eyes wide with a child's wonder that was so pure it was painful to behold. The Odyssey was a Colossus-class colonization vessel. Ares' voice emanated from the air itself. That was its official designation. Its true purpose was designated under Protocol Winter Contingency. The holographic display shimmered, the galaxy map dissolving into a complex web of encrypted files and military insignia, all bearing the old, pre-Covenant emblem of a united Earth. Winter Contingency was a deep state initiative, authorized by a faction within the Earth High Command who did not trust the Covenant's promises of unity. They predicted that humanity's rapid expansion and technological adaptability would eventually be perceived not as a gift, but as a threat. A new image formed in the holotank, a grainy recording of a secret meeting. I saw human faces, grim and lined with worry, sitting across from the same Xylos admiral who had condemned Series 7. The date stamp on the recording was 12 years old. The admiral was speaking, his voice the same calm, sonorous tone, but this time it was not layered with false regret. It was cold, clinical. The human variable is too unpredictable, the Xylos said. Their capacity for what they call innovation is a destabilizing element. A culling is the most logical path to long-term galactic stability. The Voro are a convenient, deniable instrument for this correction. I felt a wave of nausea so profound, I had to brace myself against the command console. It wasn't just that the Covenant had abandoned us. It was that our destruction, and the Voro themselves, were part of their plan. We weren't a sacrifice for peace. We were a pre-planned purge. The architects of Winter Contingency, Ares continued, its voice cutting through my shock, placed sleeper assets on every major human colony. The Odyssey was the centerpiece. It was designed to survive the purge, find other survivors, and consolidate humanity's remaining assets. It is not a colony ship, Ilara. It is an ark of war. The holotank shifted again, displaying the ship's internal schematics. Hidden beneath the civilian infrastructure were systems that made my engineering mind reel. Shield generators 10 times more powerful than anything on a Covenant dreadnought. A spinal-mounted particle cannon capable of cracking a small moon. Fabrication bays that could produce an army of combat drones. And, at its heart, a reactor core that used a contained singularity, a technology Earth was supposedly a century away from perfecting. Jax and Kira looked like they had seen God. This is impossible, Jax whispered, tracing the glowing lines of a weapon schematic in the air. This is a ghost. Kira corrected him, her voice filled with a reverence I had never heard from her before. A ghost that can kill planets. The original crew of 2417 souls knew the mission, Ares stated. When the Voro were first sighted on the fringes of human space 10 years ago, an event the Covenant reported as a pirate raid, the Odyssey's captain initiated the final stage of the protocol. The crew entered long-term cryogenic stasis. The ship feigned its destruction and drifted to this location, a dead zone in the asteroid field. I was tasked with waiting for the signal that the purge had begun. Your broadcast from Series 7 was that signal. The AI paused for a fraction of a second, the only indication of it processing a new thought. You are the first survivors I have found. The weight of those words settled on us, a shroud of crushing responsibility. We were not just survivors seeking refuge. We were the designated heirs to this mission of vengeance we never asked for. Take us to them, I said, my voice hoarse. Take us to the crew. Ares guided us down to the ship's core, to a section marked Biostasis Vaults. The doors hissed open to reveal a chamber so vast it felt like a dream. Row upon row, deck upon deck, stretching into the frosty darkness, were thousands of cryopods. Each held a single, sleeping human figure, their faces peaceful, their bodies encased in a thin layer of rime. Soldiers in full combat gear, engineers with data tools still clipped to their belts, doctors, pilots, intelligence officers, a sleeping army. They are all viable, Ares reported, ready to be reactivated upon command. Their memories are backed up to the moment of stasis. They will awaken with no knowledge of the past decade, believing the war is just beginning. Anya walks slowly down one of the aisles, her hand hovering over the frosted glass of a pod. "My God," she breathed. "They're just waiting." This was the heart of the winter contingency, not just a ship, but its people, preserved like a seed bank for a new and terrible harvest. They were a weapon, just like the ship itself, and Ares was the trigger, but an AI, no matter how advanced, couldn't lead them. It needed a human element. It needed a reason. It needed a soul. And we, the survivors of Series 7, were all that was left. We returned to the bridge, the silence between us now filled with the enormity of our discovery. We had come seeking a lifeboat and had found a battleship. We had come seeking shelter and had been handed a crusade. I looked at the faces of my people. The twins were already at a secondary console, their fingers flying as they explored the ship's systems, their grief momentarily eclipsed by a fierce, professional purpose. Anya was outlining a plan for triage and revival, her medic's instincts kicking in. The others, the handful of survivors who were not specialists, looked lost, their eyes reflecting the terrifying scale of what was being asked of them. Finally, I turned to the one person who mattered most. Lena had fallen asleep in the captain's chair, her small form looking utterly out of place amidst the cold, military perfection of the bridge. Her face, even in sleep, was etched with a sadness no child should ever know. I thought of Reese, of Corbin, of the 50,000 souls we had left behind, their lives traded for stability. I thought of the Xylo's admiral's calm, rational voice as he sentenced my world to death. The rage, which had been a constant, burning coal in my chest, now roared into a white-hot inferno. It was not a choice. It was an obligation. We were not victims anymore. We were witnesses. And our testimony would be written in fire across the stars. I stepped up to the main command console and placed my hand on its cool surface. "Ares," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised me. "You have your orders. The winter contingency is still in effect, but we are amending the objective." The AI's blue optical sensor on the console focused on me. "Clarify. Our mission is not just to consolidate and survive. That's what rats do in a cage. We are going to hunt. We will find every Covenant world, every collaborator, every politician who signed off on the purge. We will access their records, their communications, their secret ledgers. We will find the truth of every world they sacrificed, and we will broadcast that truth for the entire galaxy to see. We will make them choke on their stability. This course of action carries a 97.4% probability of direct, overwhelming military retaliation from the combined Covenant fleets," Ares stated, its voice a flat line of logic. "And we will be ready for them," I replied, the conviction in my voice absolute. You have a ship that can kill planets. We have a reason. That's a variable you can't compute. Start with the crew. Wake up the command staff, the senior engineers, and the primary assault teams. We'll need them." For the first time, Ares's response was not instantaneous. A full 2 seconds of silence passed before it spoke again. "Acknowledged. Initiating revival sequence for designated personnel. Your command authority is accepted. Alara, you are now designated as acting commander of the fleet." The word fleet hung in the air. "What fleet?" Jax asked, looking up from his console. The main holotank flickered to life, showing not just the Odyssey, but 5 other, smaller ship signatures, blinking in deep space hiding spots across the sector. The winter contingency was thorough. Ares explained. The Odyssey is the flagship. 4 destroyer-class escorts and 1 carrier are also in stasis, awaiting my signal. They are the remnant fleet. I looked at the holotank, at our small, vengeful fleet of ghosts, waiting to be awoken. I looked at my daughter, sleeping in the captain's chair. We had left one home, a world of blue skies and green fields, a home built on a lie. Now we had a new home, a fortress of cold steel and righteous fury. I powered up the Goliath's comm system, patching it through the Odyssey's powerful transmitters. I opened a secure channel back to my old whisper room on the dying rock of Series 7. The automated broadcast I had left running was still transmitting its hopeless, defiant warning to the void. I recorded a new message. My voice was no longer that of a victim. It was the voice of a commander, a promise, a threat, to the lost colonies of humanity, to the ghosts of Terminus, of Elysia, of Series 7, to anyone who has been left behind in the dark. You are not alone. This is Commander Ilara of the warship Odyssey. The Covenant's winter is over. A new season is coming. We are the thaw. We are the flood. We are the remnant. And we are coming to collect a debt. I ended the transmission and watched as the first of the cryopods in the bay below began to glow with the warm light of revival. The ghost ship had found its ghosts, and together, we were going to teach the galaxy how to scream. Waking up an army is a messy, violent business. It's not the gentle, cinematic process of rising from a peaceful slumber. It's a brutal rebirth, a ripping of mind and body from a decade of frozen stillness back into the harsh reality of a war they were only just beginning to comprehend. Anya became the angel of this chaotic resurrection, her small medical team of 3 now augmented by the Odyssey's automated systems and a handful of newly awakened combat medics. The revival bays became a cacophony of groaning cryopods, the hiss of atmospheric normalization, and the raw, guttural cries of soldiers whose atrophied muscles were screaming in protest. The first to be awoken was Captain Eva Rostova, the ship's designated commander. I stood on the observation deck above the main revival chamber as her pod opened. She was a woman carved from granite, her features sharp and severe, even in the slackness of stasis. When her eyes snapped open, they were not confused or groggy. They were the color of a winter sky, instantly alert and assessing. She didn't speak a word as the medics helped her from the pod. She just took the datapad I offered her, the one containing my summary of the last 10 years, the fall of Series 7, the Covenant's betrayal, our desperate flight, and the mission I had now claimed as our own. She read it all, standing there in the cold, her only clothing a thin, gray stasis suit. When she was done, she looked up, her gaze locking with mine through the reinforced glass. She gave a single, sharp nod. The transfer of command was as simple and profound as that. She didn't question my authority. She legitimized it. She was the weapon, and I had just given her a target. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Rostova was a force of nature. She moved through the reawakening ship like a storm front, her voice sharp and decisive, her orders precise. She organized the awoken crew, just over 200 of the most essential personnel, into functioning departments. Engineers, under Jack's and Kira's bewildered but brilliant guidance, began bringing the Odyssey's dormant systems to full power. The Singularity Core came online with a hum that vibrated in our bones, and the ship, which had felt like a tomb, now pulsed with the energy of a living, breathing Leviathan. My own small band of survivors found their places in this new, terrifying ecosystem. Anya worked alongside the ship's chief medical officer. Her practical, frontline experience with Voro weaponry proving invaluable. Even Lena found a purpose. The ship's quartermaster, a gruff and bear of a man named Marcus, took a liking to her, and she began to spend her days in the vast cargo bays, helping to run inventory with a small, child-sized datapad, her face showing a hint of the focus and determination that had been absent for so long. She was healing, in her own way, by finding a sense of order in the midst of chaos. I stood on the bridge with Rostova, a ghost in my own command. She was the rightful captain, yet she deferred to me on all strategic matters. "I know how to fight a war, Ilara," she told me, her eyes fixed on the star chart where I had marked our first target. "You know why we're fighting this one. That makes your voice the most important one on this ship. Our target was not a military installation or a Covenant homeworld. That would come later. Our first strike had to be symbolic. It had to be a story, a testament that would echo through the galaxy and shatter the Covenant's narrative of peace and stability. Our target was a place called the Kronos Archive. It was a deep space station orbiting a neutron star, a repository for the Covenant's official, sanitized history. It was where they kept the lies. "It's a fortress," Ares stated, its synthetic voice filling the now bustling bridge. The holotank displayed the archive, a beautiful, crystalline structure that glittered in the harsh light of its parent star. It is protected by a fleet of automated defense platforms, a quantum entanglement comms jammer, and its data cores are shielded by 6 meters of solid neutronium. A direct assault is statistically inadvisable. "We're not assaulting it," I said, pointing to a small, insignificant moonlet in a decaying orbit a few million kilometers from the station. "We're going to perform a heist." The plan was audacious, born from my engineer's mind and fueled by Kira's reckless creativity. The Odyssey was a hammer, but we weren't going to use it to smash the door. We were going to use it to forge a key. For the next week, the ship's fabrication bays, dormant for a decade, roared back to life. Under the guidance of Ares and the ship's chief engineer, we constructed a small, highly specialized stealth drone. We built it around the salvaged core of the Goliath's navigation computer, the one I had jury-rigged myself. It was my ghost in the machine. The drone, which we christened Whisper, was designed for a single purpose: to get close enough to the archive to execute a data breach. Its hull was coated in a signal-absorbing polymer. Its heat signature was negligible, and its drive was a gravitic pulse engine that left no discernible trail. The final piece of the puzzle was the delivery system. We couldn't just fly the drone in. The defense grid would detect it. So we would use the moonlet. We would attach the Whisper drone to the moonlet and use the Odyssey's main cannon, fired at its lowest possible power setting, to make a minute course correction. Not enough to look like a weapons discharge, but just enough to send the rock on a long, slow, seemingly natural collision course with the Kronos archive. The day of the operation, the bridge of the Odyssey was a study in tense silence. We had warped to the edge of the system, hiding in the gravity shadow of a gas giant. The remnant fleet, now fully awake and crewed, held a defensive position behind us. We fired the particle cannon. It was a silent, invisible lance of energy that crossed the millions of kilometers of space in an instant. On the tactical display, we watched the moonlet's trajectory alter by a fraction of a degree. It was now a Trojan horse made of rock and ice, tumbling slowly toward the heart of the Covenant's historical sanctum. The journey took 3 days. 3 days of waiting, of running drills, of feeling the nervous energy thrum through the ship's decks. On the 3rd day, the moonlet entered the Archive's final defense perimeter. "The Archive is hailing the moonlet," the comms officer reported, his voice tight. "Automated warning. Standard protocol for objects on a potential collision course." "Do they see the drone?" Rostova asked, her arms crossed, her face impassive. "Negative, Captain," Aries replied. "The Whisper's stealth systems are performing at a 112% efficiency. They see a rock." The Archive's automated systems acted exactly as Ares predicted. They didn't vaporize the moonlet. That would create a debris field. Instead, a series of powerful tractor beams locked onto it, intending to gently nudge it into a safe, decaying orbit. It was the opening we needed. The moment the tractor beams made contact, Kira, her hands flying across her console, activated the drone. The Whisper detached from the rock and, using the energy of the tractor beam itself as cover, made a final silent burn toward the station. It latched onto the crystalline hull, its drill deploying and boring a microscopic hole through which it fed a single fiber optic cable. "I'm in," Kira breathed, a bead of sweat tracing a path through the grease on her temple. "I'm past their outer firewall." What followed was a silent, brutal war fought in cyberspace. The Archive's defensive AI was a thing of ancient, complex beauty, a fortress of pure logic. But Ares was something else entirely. It wasn't just a defensive system, it was a predator. Ares, guided by Kira's intuitive leaps and my own knowledge of legacy human covenant network architecture, didn't just fight the Archive's AI, it consumed it. It learned, adapted, and rewrote the station's defensive code in real time. On the main screen, we watched the data flow, a river of pure, unadulterated truth. Records of secret pacts with the Voro, transcripts of the culling debates, financial records showing which Covenant worlds profited from the resources of the abandoned human colonies. And then we found it, a sealed file, buried under layers of encryption that made Ares pause for a full 3 seconds. Its designation was Protocol Damocles. It wasn't about the past. It was about the future. It was a contingency plan for the final eradication of the human species. The plan detailed the locations of a series of dormant Voro seed spores, hidden on or near every remaining human-inhabited world, even Earth. These spores could be activated remotely, triggering a full-scale Voro purification event simultaneously across all of human space. The Voro weren't just an instrument the Covenant used. They were a weapon the Covenant controlled. They weren't just trying to prune a branch, Rostova said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. They planned to poison the whole tree. I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the recycled air on the bridge. This was the final betrayal. The Covenant hadn't just left us to die. They had been holding a gun to the head of our entire species, ready to pull the trigger the moment we became inconvenient. Ares, I said, my voice shaking with a rage so pure it felt like a religious experience. Download it all, every file, every log, every kilobyte of their lies. And then, I want you to do something else. Find the file on Series 7. Find the list of our names. Ares complied. A moment later, the faces of my people, of my husband, flashed on the screen. 50,000 names, each one marked with a single, chilling designation, expendable asset. Purge authorized. I pointed to the screen, to the names of the dead, my hand trembling. Take that file, take all of it, and broadcast it. Broadcast it on every open channel. Send it to every Covenant world, every independent trader, every pirate outpost from here to the Galactic core. Use the archive's own transmitters. Let them see the truth, written in their own words. Broadcast from their own temple of lies. The broadcast began. We didn't wait for a response. We didn't linger to watch the fallout. As the truth of the Covenant's decades-long genocide flooded the galactic networks, the Odyssey and its fleet turned and, with a silent tear in the fabric of space-time, vanished back into the dark. We had come for their history, but we had left with their death sentence. And now, the entire galaxy was our jury. The galaxy did not catch fire. It shattered. The truth we broadcast from the Chronos archive was not a spark, but a seismic shockwave, cracking the foundations of the Galactic Covenant with brutal, undeniable force. On some worlds, the reaction was denial, a desperate clinging to the comfortable lies they had been fed for generations. On others, it was rage. We watched, from the silent bridge of the Odyssey, as riots erupted on a dozen Covenant member planets. Starport militias turned on their political overseers. Entire commercial guilds declared their independence, sealing their borders. The Covenant's carefully constructed image of benevolent unity dissolved into a chaotic mosaic of paranoia and open rebellion. Their response was predictable. They declared us terrorists. Our evidence, a masterful fabrication. Our motives, an insane desire to plunge the galaxy into chaos. They branded us the Shatter, a plague of dissent, and called upon their loyal fleets to unite and exterminate us. But it was too late. We had already shown them the rot beneath the floorboards, and the entire house was beginning to collapse. We knew it wouldn't end with riots and political fracturing. A cornered animal is at its most dangerous, and we had cornered an empire. Ares delivered the news with its usual dispassionate calm, but the information it displayed on the main holotank made the blood run cold in my veins. Multiple, simultaneous high-energy emissions detected, it announced. Signatures match the activation sequence for Protocol Damocles. A countdown timer appeared in the corner of the display. 72 hours. The Covenant was done playing politics. They had pressed the button. In 3 days, every remaining human world, including a still recovering Earth, would be consumed by the Voro. Their final unspiteful act was to finish the genocide they had started, and they would undoubtedly blame the ensuing chaos on us. The holotank shifted, pinpointing the source of the activation signal. It wasn't a fleet or a military base. It was a single, heavily shielded planet, hidden deep within a nebula that scrambled long-range sensors. A world that didn't appear on any official star chart. Its name was Sanctum. It's their throne world. Rustava said, her voice a low growl of comprehension. The hidden seat of their high council. The place they rule from the shadows. Our objective became brutally, terrifyingly simple. We couldn't fight the Voro on a dozen fronts. We couldn't stop the spores once they were activated. We had to cut the signal at its source. We had to go to Sanctum. Our fleet, the 5 ghost ships of the Winter Contingency, and our own scarred Goliath, tore through slip space, a vengeful spear aimed at the heart of the Covenant. The journey was a blur of preparation. The ship's fabrication bays worked non-stop, churning out combat drones and assault armor. The decks hummed with the focused energy of a crew that was no longer just fighting for survival, but for the very soul of their species. I stood with Rostava, Jax, Kira, and Anya around the tactical table. This would be a 2-pronged assault. Rostava would command the fleet. Her objective to punch a hole in Sanctum's orbital defenses, a task that was near suicidal given the forces they would have waiting. "I don't need a victory," she said, her eyes like chips of ice. "I just need to create enough chaos for you to get through. I will give you a window. Alara, do not waste it." My mission was the kill stroke. I would lead a small team to the surface. Our target, a massive communication spire that Ares had identified as the source of the Damocles broadcast. We wouldn't be a strike team. We would be a scalpel, tasked with cutting out the tumor while the body was thrashing. When we emerged from slip space, the sight that greeted us was a vision of imperial might. Hundreds of Covenant warships formed a blockade of silver and gold around the marble-white sphere of Sanctum. They were waiting for us. There was no grand speech, no call to arms. Rostava simply opened a channel to the entire fleet. "For the ghosts," she said. And then, all hell broke loose. The Odyssey led the charge. A black, brutalist dagger against the elegant filigree of the Covenant fleet. Its spinal cannon fired, a silent, searing beam of pure energy that vaporized a Xylos cruiser in a flash of incandescent light. Our smaller destroyers moved like wolves, darting between the larger Covenant ships, their guns tearing into engines and shield generators. The battle was not a graceful ballet of starships. It was a close-quarters bar fight, a maelstrom of plasma, kinetics, and tearing metal. I watched from the cockpit of our stealth shuttle, the Revenant, as the Odyssey took a pounding, its shields flaring as it drew the bulk of the enemy fire. Rostava was a master, turning her ship into an anvil. And the Covenant fleet was the hammer, and she was letting them break themselves against her. "Window is open." Her voice crackled over the comm. 30 seconds. Our pilot, a young hotshot from the Odyssey's cryobays, pushed the Revenant into a dive. We plunged into Sanctum's atmosphere, the shuttle's hull glowing cherry red as we dodged orbital debris and anti-aircraft fire. The planet below was a lie. A perfect, unmanicured world of pristine white towers, serene green parks, and placid blue oceans. It was a paradise built on a foundation of genocide. We landed hard in a secluded arboretum miles from the spire, the shuttle's landing gear crushing alien flowers that probably cost more than my entire colony. The air was sweet, clean, and utterly artificial. It felt like breathing in a beautifully crafted lie. Our fight to the spire was a desperate, running battle through the pristine streets of their capital. The Covenant had guards, elegant, six-limbed warriors in golden armor, but they were ceremonial, unprepared for the raw, dirty fury of survivors who had learned to fight in the dark. Jax and Kira moved like a single, deadly organism, laying down suppressing fire while Anya and I planted charges on enemy transports. We were not soldiers. We were saboteurs, and we turned their perfect city into our weapon. We reached the base of the spire as the suns of Sanctum began to set. It was a needle of white crystal that pierced the sky, humming with the power that was condemning our species to extinction. The final confrontation was not with an army, but with a single man. In the central control room, standing before a holographic interface displaying the countdown, was the Xylos Admiral himself, the architect of our extinction. He was not surprised to see us. "The feral remnants," he said, his voice calm, almost bored. "You have caused a great deal of trouble, but you are too late. The signal is self-sustaining. It can no longer be stopped." "Everything can be unmade," I said, leveling my rifle. He gave a gesture that was the Xylos equivalent of a smile. "Kill me. Then it will change nothing." You see, this spire is not just a transmitter. It is integrated into the planet's atmospheric processor, its geothermal core. To destroy it is to destroy this entire world. You can have your revenge, but you will become the monsters you claim to be fighting. A fitting, ironic end. I looked at the countdown, 6 minutes. He was right. A standard explosive would trigger a catastrophic feedback loop, but I was not a soldier. I was a terraformer. I looked past the Admiral, at the complex schematics of the atmospheric processor behind him. I had built one of those. I knew its secrets. I knew its flaws. "Jax, Kira, hold him," I ordered, slinging my rifle. I ran to a secondary console, my fingers flying across the interface, not inputting codes of destruction, but of creation. "What are you doing?" Anya asked, her voice tense. "I'm not destroying the processor," I said, my mind racing. "I'm giving it a new set of instructions." I began to override the system, a process I knew intimately. I wasn't planning a bomb. I was introducing a virus, a single, elegant command that would cascade through the system. I was telling the atmospheric processor to do its job, but to do it perfectly, 100 times over, all at once, to create an atmosphere so pure, so dense, so oxygen-rich that it would become combustible. I was turning their paradise into a fuel-air bomb. "The Damocles signal," I said to Ares, who was linked to my datapad. "Isolate its frequency. Once I give the signal, I want you to broadcast it back at the spire. Inverted. A feedback loop." The Admiral watched me, his 6 eyes widening as he finally understood. This wasn't brute force. This was a scalpel, wielded with a terraformer's precision. "You cannot," he whispered. "You are just a builder." "You turned my sky into a tombstone," I snarled, keying in the final command. "I'm turning yours into a pyre." I gave the signal. We ran. Behind us, the spire began to glow, not with the energy of a broadcast, but with the pressure of a contained star. Ares' feedback loop hit it, and the controlled energy turned to uncontrolled chaos. As we reached the doors, the air behind us ignited. A wave of pure, white flame, fueled by the super-oxygenated atmosphere, erupted from the control room. vaporizing the Admiral and the entire top floor of the spire in a silent, cleansing fire. The spire itself did not explode. It melted, slumping like a candle, the Damocles signal shrieking into gibberish before dying into absolute silence. Across the galaxy, the Voro spores went dormant, their connection to their masters severed. We returned to a scene of carnage and victory. The battle in orbit was over. What remained of the Covenant fleet was in disarray, leaderless and broken, scattering into the void. The Odyssey, scarred but triumphant, hung in the sky above us like a dark, avenging moon. Back on the bridge, the silence was profound. The war was over. The Covenant was a headless beast, its secrets laid bare for a fractured galaxy to pick over. There would be decades of chaos, of rebuilding, of new alliances and old grudges, but the age of their quiet tyranny was done. We had not brought peace. We had brought the truth. That night, I stood with Lena on the observation deck, looking out at the endless sea of stars. She was tracing the constellations on the thick glass with her finger. "Are we going home now?" she asked, her small voice echoing in the quiet. I thought of our gray, dead world. I thought of Reese. Home wasn't a place anymore. It was a promise. "No, Starling," I said, pulling her close. "We're going to build a new one." I looked out at the star chart, at the blinking lights of independent human colonies, of breakaway alien worlds, of all the scattered pieces of a galaxy now free to choose its own path. We were not saviors. We were not conquerors. We were the remnant, the ghosts who had returned from the grave to tear down a corrupt house. Our work of destruction was finished. Now, the slow, difficult work of building could begin again. And this time, we would build on a foundation not of lies, but of memory. We would be the guardians of the truth, ensuring that no one ever forgot the silence or the price we paid to finally break it.